Carlos was an experienced truck driver with 30 years on the road. He knew highways, gas stations, and repair shops all over the country. His arms were strong, the result of years of holding the steering wheel of a heavy truck loaded with all kinds of merchandise, and his gaze was steady, indicating a man who wasn't easily rattled. However, on this new route, something unusual started happening, and Carlos would discover that even without anything supernatural, fear can hide in the small gaps of reality. The trip in question involved transporting a load of valuable electronic car products from a large distribution center in São Paulo to a retail store in the interior of Minas Gerais. The route wasn't the longest he'd ever driven, but circumstances made everything more complicated. Recently, there had been a wave of assaults and cargo thefts in that region. The company Carlos worked for had issued several warnings, advising caution when traveling at quieter times, especially at night or in the early morning. With that in mind, Carlos planned his route to avoid the most dangerous stretches. Even so, he couldn't entirely bypass the roads with less traffic, and at some point he'd have to travel along a long state highway that practically had no shoulder and poor lighting. He decided to set out early, still in the morning, aiming to arrive at his destination the same day. However, a series of setbacks, including loading delays, a problem with the cargo documentation, and unexpected traffic, meant he only really got the truck on the road by late afternoon. As night fell, Carlos found himself driving along a nearly deserted highway with limited visibility and few passing vehicles. The dashboard lights showed only the basics: gear, fuel level, and engine temperature. The headlights cast a yellowish beam on the narrow road, and a light fog began to form, heightening the sense of isolation. To add to his discomfort, a fine drizzle started. The windshield wipers squeaked with each pass, and the road turned slick. Carlos stayed alert, knowing that anything could happen here. At one point, he noticed a small car behind his truck, but its taillights turned off or on in a strange way. They were very dim, giving the impression the vehicle might approach or fall back without warning. Carlos tried to get a better look in the rearview mirror, but it was as though the car suddenly vanished. Then it reappeared at some distance, yet he never heard any engine accelerating. For a while, Carlos thought it might just be the rain's reflection or a defect in his own mirrors. Still, he was increasingly feeling followed. Something about that situation didn't add up. He decided to slow down to see if the car would overtake him. Surprisingly, that faint, flickering light kept the same distance. It didn't come closer, nor did it drop back. As the tension grew, Carlos considered stopping at a gas station. However, in that desolate stretch, there was nothing for miles. Only wet asphalt, dark fields, and trees that seemed twisted by the wind. The truck's radio was silent. No signal, no music or news to break the stillness. All he heard was the rhythmic noise of the rain and the engine's rumble. Moving on, the truck began to have sudden electrical issues. The dashboard lights flickered before returning to normal. Not now, please, Carlos thought, dreading being stranded on that nearly empty road. He recalled that about 30 kilometers ahead, there would be a rest stop for truckers. He had to reach it by any means. While the dashboard lights blinked, the rearview mirror showed the mysterious car still, holding steady like a persistent shadow. Suddenly, a dashboard warning light came on, indicating an electrical system problem. The windshield wiper slowed, and Carlos feared losing visibility altogether. The truck's headlights stayed on, but dimmer now. Then he noticed something even stranger. The car behind him turned its lights off entirely, though he could still make out a silhouette on the road, nearly blending into the darkness. Finally spotting the sign for the rest area, Carlos felt relieved. He slowed further to safely take the access turn, but the engine sputtered. He had to floor the accelerator so the vehicle wouldn't stall, nearly causing a loud backfire. His heart pounded, but luckily the truck kept going. Reaching the station area, the place was almost deserted. Only a sleepy attendant was there, who, upon seeing the big truck arriving, jumped up to help. Carlos stopped under the fueling canopy and got out. Rain was still pouring steadily, but he felt safer under. At least some light. Glancing back for that car, he saw nothing. It was as if no one else was there anymore. Carlos spoke with the attendant, an older man, mentioning part of what had happened. The man confirmed that thieves sometimes drove cars without plates or with faulty lights, trying to intimidate truckers into stopping in remote spots. Their goal could be following the victim, waiting for them to stop far from any support, then robbing them. It was also possible that, seeing the station, the pursuer had given up. The attendant suggested Carlos rest a bit, and if he wanted, park the truck out back, where there was plenty of room. Taking that suggestion, Carlos parked his truck, ate a quick meal, and prepared to rest some, though tension kept him awake. The thought of someone lying in wait when he left made him shiver. Adding to that, the truck's electrical system was unstable, posing a real risk of breaking down. Late night wore on. Instead of stopping, the rain got heavier. Through the cabin's fogged glass, he could only make out the silhouettes of a few lights illuminating the rest area. Suddenly, something caught Carlos's eye. At the edge of his vision, a faint, flickering light reminiscent of that car. He stepped out to see it more clearly, but found only darkness and rain. I must be getting paranoid, he thought, shivering, in the cold wind. Next morning, a different attendant, a tired-looking woman, was cleaning the fuel pumps. Carlos asked her quickly if there had been anything odd overnight, but she said she hadn't seen a thing. Still unsettled, he checked the truck and saw the electrical problem seemed gone. The dashboard warning light was off. Maybe moisture had affected some connections, and with improved weather, everything stabilized. He decided to go on. The rain had become a drizzle, and daybreak was coming. Still feeling a bit uneasy, he continued his route until his destination, spending the final hours without further incident. Yet at every turn, at every distant vehicle, Carlos felt a knot in his stomach. He felt watched, as if the car or its possible occupants still observed him. He arrived at the delivery site, unloaded, and everything seemed normal. Time passed, and Carlos took other journeys. He never saw that strange car again. But whenever he drives lonely roads at night, he senses a shadow might reappear in his mirrors, a reminder of the terror he felt, and a constant warning that even without ghosts or apparitions, danger can be very close. Uncertainty is the greatest source of suspense, and in the solitude of the road it grows even larger. He prefers to keep it as a warning. After all, in this profession, true fear doesn't come from supernatural creatures, but from the very real threats that appear unannounced, blending with the darkness of night. Luis drove his box truck all over the country. He had earned that nickname for his thick beard and the generous mustache he had worn since his youth. He was known for punctuality and for not asking too many questions about the cargo he transported. His commitment was to the freight: load up, move it, and deliver on time. Once, however, that no questions asked attitude got him into trouble. He was hired to transport a special shipment from São Luís in the state of Maranhão to Brazil's border. The instructions were clear. Under no circumstances should he open the truck, and he was not to stop anywhere beyond the strictly necessary points for refueling. Luis found it all very strange, but the pay was generous. He needed the money, as he had some personal debts. So, without hesitation, he took the job. When he received the sealed truck, he felt a chill. A different kind of padlock, apparently very sturdy, was securing the rear door. The client stressed that he should not be curious about the contents. With a nod, Luis indicated he would obey. Still, deep down, all this strictness made him uneasy. He began the long journey across federal highways. At first, everything went normally. But entering the state of Tocantins, he noticed a black car following him insistently, changing lanes along with him, maintaining the same speed, as if trying to study him. Luis noticed the behavior but kept going. That same car did likewise, until they reached a busier stretch of road. Then it pulled away. Could be a coincidence, he thought. Later, when he stopped at a gas station, He felt he was being watched. He saw no one openly suspicious, but he had that uncomfortable sense of being the focus of someone's stare. He refueled, grabbed a quick snack, and hit the road again, sticking to the order not to open the box. Whatever's in there isn't my problem, he kept telling himself, trying to stay calm. After a while, on less traveled state highways, he again spotted the black car. It showed up in his mirrors, then vanished, kept its distance like a predator lying in wait. Luis decided to speed up a bit to shake it off, but his truck, though powerful, had its limits. Then he turned onto an even more deserted road, and fear set in. He considered stopping at a police post, but saw none in sight. He was in a stretch lined with vast farms, no buildings nearby. The atmosphere grew more tense as night fell. Dense, roadside vegetation seemed capable of hiding anything. Those headlights of the black car appeared and disappeared in the distance. It might just be another driver, but something in that persistent behavior kept Luis on edge. Suddenly, on a sharp curve, a second vehicle, a light-colored pickup, pulled onto the road, blocking his way. To avoid a collision, Luis had to brake hard and nearly lost control of the truck, which swayed dangerously. When he came to a stop, he saw 3 men stepping out of the pickup. They all looked nervous, and one pointed something resembling a gun under his jacket. The black car that had been behind him also pulled over, and from it emerged another tall man with a grim look. "Get out of the truck!" shouted one of the men. Luis felt his blood run cold. If this was a robbery, what did they want? The cargo? His money? Before he could speak, another man approached, speaking with a thick accent, demanding he open the back of the truck. He explained it was locked, and he didn't have the key. Only the person who hired him had the key. The men seemed doubtful. They threatened to break the padlock right there, and that's what they did. Using heavy tools, they tore it off. Meanwhile, Luis could only watch, nearly paralyzed with fear. Once they got the cargo hold open, they shouted for Luis to turn around. He heard sounds of boxes being rummaged through. The trucker tried to imagine what might be stored inside. Guns? Drugs, stolen jewelry, something valuable on the black market. Suddenly, he heard a frustrated shout. The group's leader threw something onto the floor of the truck, swearing. From what Luis could gather, they hadn't found what they were looking for. The leader turned on Luis. "Where's the other shipment? You trying to trick me?" he roared. Luis was confused. He knew nothing, repeating that he'd only been hired to haul the sealed cargo and didn't ask questions. For a few seconds, everyone stood in silence. Tension so thick, it seemed physically heavy in the air. One of the boxes lay open, and Luis realized they were just common electronic instruments, nothing out of the ordinary. Furious, the leader kicked the truck's side and ordered everyone back to the pickup. Before leaving, one of the men hurled a threat. "If we find out you're lying, you'll regret it." They sped off, with the black car following. Luis stayed there, heart pounding, unable to believe what had just happened. The road was silent, darkness pressing in except for his truck's headlights still illuminating the asphalt. He climbed into the driver's seat on trembling legs. He had to do something but wasn't sure whether to call the police or move on. Deciding to continue his journey, he thought, "I just want to get rid of this cargo as soon as possible." He resecured the rear door as best he could with an emergency chain and kept driving. He arrived at the destination by early morning, a remote warehouse near Brazil's border. He expected to meet the client, but instead was greeted by a terse employee who signaled Luis where to park. While some men offloaded the boxes, the employee made a brief remark. "Any trouble on the road?" "Some guys tried to steal the load, but they took nothing," Luis replied, still on edge. The employee merely nodded, showing no surprise or curiosity. Handing him a payment envelope, he told him to leave. Luis departed, feeling relieved, yet guilty. It was clear something was off about that transport, even though the cargo had apparently only been electronics. The gang's violent behavior indicated they were after something else, likely something not actually there, or else it had already been swapped so he wouldn't suspect. Either way, the situation left a deep mark on his mind. A few weeks later, Luis heard rumors that a criminal ring was hunting for a trucker who had allegedly transported contraband military parts. It was a big deal, involving security agents and international smugglers. He wondered if it might be the same case. So, maybe the client had tricked everyone, using his truck as a decoy to throw them off. Luis spent anxious days fearing a grim outcome. He considered going to the police to tell what had happened, but worried that might only make things worse for him. Luckily, nothing happened. Nobody came after him. Still, he never forgot the terror on that road, those guns, the threats, and, above all, he now realized that curiosity, in certain lines of work, can save lives. If he had investigated beforehand, he might have refused the job or done something different. The lesson, though, was seared in. The most dangerous cargo isn't necessarily something supernatural. It's the kind that conceals human greed and cruelty. These days, Luis only takes jobs after checking all the details and following strict security protocols. He knows that on Brazilian roads, the danger isn't limited to accidents or poor road conditions. Human hands, with all too unworthy intentions, can turn a simple freight run into a real nightmare. Mariana was one of the rare women to drive a heavy truck on the country's highways. She had inherited her father's passion. He had been a truck driver for decades. From a young age, she was enthralled by the freedom of the open road, the horizon unfolding before her eyes, even though she was well aware of the dangers of being a woman in this line of work. Still, she pursued her dream, bought her own truck, and began accepting freight jobs wherever she was needed. One night, she needed to cross a mountainous region marked by winding curves and frightening cliffs. She was hauling construction equipment to a work site in a rural town. It would be a trip of more than 400 kilometers, and she estimated that she could reach halfway before dark, then rest at a roadside inn. However, delays at the company that hired her forced her to depart almost at sunset. As she climbed the mountain, the engine roaring, she noticed how little traffic there was. The signs indicated long distances before the next gas station. The wind buffeted the sides of the truck, giving the impression it might tip it over at any moment. Mariana stayed fully focused, shifting down whenever she saw sharper curves. She knew that any mistake there could be fatal. Moreover, the typical fog of the region was starting to set in, making visibility even more difficult. Despite the difficulties, she pressed on. At some point, she spotted a vehicle pulled over on the shoulder, an old van that looked broken down. A man was waving frantically, asking for help. She hesitated. She knew how risky it was to stop at night, especially alone. But the plea seemed genuine. She slowed and pulled over a few meters ahead, keeping some distance for safety. Heart pounding, but trying to appear confident, she got out of the cab. The man approached and said the van had a mechanical failure. He needed a ride to the next station or town to get assistance. He seemed anxious, glancing around as if he were afraid of something. Mariana argued that it wasn't safe to pick up a stranger, but at the same time, she felt compassion. Then she noticed a look of sheer panic in his eyes. "Please, miss, something really strange is happening to me. I need to get out of here now," he gasped. The words, "something strange," already set off alarm bells in Mariana's mind. She asked what that something strange was, but the man dodged the question, appearing shocked. Even so, she decided to help. She let him into the cab, warning him he could stay only until the next station or rest area. The man agreed, visibly relieved. They got back on the road. During the drive, the man explained he was traveling for work, transporting sound equipment for an event, but the van suddenly conked out. He also mentioned seeing bright lights and hearing unexplainable noises off the shoulder. But before Mariana could worry about anything supernatural, he added that they might have been armed men, as he saw silhouettes that appeared to carry guns, and he felt threatened. He wasn't sure, but preferred to flee. Hearing that put Mariana even more on guard. If there truly were dangerous individuals around, Her decision to help him might mean she was now also in their sights. She kept a watchful eye on her mirrors. The road remained twisty, and the fog was thickening. Below them was a cliff, faintly lit by the moon and her headlights, reminding her constantly of the risk of any sudden move. A few kilometers later, her headlights illuminated something in the road, a large branch, nearly a trunk, blocking part of the lane. Mariana braked. She had to move it aside to continue. The hitchhiker got out willingly to help remove the obstacle. The trunk was heavy, but they managed to push it off to the shoulder. As they were about to return to the cab, they heard an engine sound approaching and saw a flash of headlights. To their horror, a dark pickup truck came at high speed and stopped abruptly in front of them. Two men jumped out, shouting for them to stay put. Mariana and the young man exchanged looks of pure fear. One of the men, holding a gun, demanded they hand over anything valuable and asked about the truck's cargo. The other man ran to the back of the truck, trying to open the doors. At that moment, the hitchhiker yelled, "Run! They're criminals!" Mariana, however, couldn't just run away on foot. The truck was her livelihood, and the road offered no shelter, only the drop-off beside it. She stood there, thinking of a way out. The armed man shouted for them to open the back. She explained it was locked, and that there was no reason to unlock it. It was just construction equipment. He didn't believe her. He pointed his gun at her. Meanwhile, the hitchhiker managed to slip away in the opposite direction, out of the gunman's line of sight. Tension climbed. The attacker lost patience and seemed about to fire. Terrified, Mariana ducked behind the front wheel of the truck, praying she wouldn't get hit. His accomplice was kicking the back door without much success. Amid the chaos, their pickup truck remained running, its headlights illuminating the scene, casting frantic shadows in the foggy night. Suddenly, the hitchhiker appeared holding a metal bar and struck the armed man's arm, causing him to drop the weapon. It was an act of desperation. He shouted for Mariana to get in the truck and go. Without hesitation, she jumped into the cab, started up the engine, and accelerated as hard as she could. The heavy vehicle lurched forward onto the asphalt and sped off. In the rear view, she saw the man running, pursued by the criminal's partner. Sadly, there was no way to rescue him without risking her own life right there. Guilt flooded her, but she had to get away to call for help. A few minutes later, she came upon an improvised police post in a small mountain village. She slammed on the brakes, rushed inside to report the robbery. The officers calmed her and went to the spot she described, but they found no sign of the criminals or the young man. The broken van was also gone. Maybe they had taken it or destroyed it. Mariana felt shattered, but could do no more. She had to keep going. Shaken, she went to the village's only inn. She spent a sleepless night reliving the scene, worried about the young man's fate. The next day, after speaking with the police again, she learned there were no new leads on him. No body was found. No one had showed up at any nearby hospital. Apparently, the man disappeared into the woods or escaped somehow. It remained a disturbing enigma. Even so, Mariana went on with her life, completed her delivery, and returned home. But for a long time, she was tormented by unanswered questions. Who exactly were those robbers? Why did they block the road with that trunk? Were they after valuable cargo, or did they just attack whoever came along? And most of all, what happened to the man she decided to help? Maybe he was involved in something dangerous, or maybe he fled so he wouldn't be found. She would never know. The incident left the unmistakable stamp of genuine fear, one that needs no ghosts to manifest. All it took was the darkness of night, an isolated road, and people with bad intentions. In a truck driver's routine, often the real terror lies in human unpredictability, in the emptiness of a road where no one can hear a cry for help in time. Still, Mariana continues to drive, because her love of the open road is stronger than the fear. But now, every stop, every curve, every request for help is weighed with far more caution. After all, real suspense isn't in myths. It's in how the next move, by a stranger or by fate itself, can suddenly change everything.